Chapter 1. The Second Wedding. The afternoon sun spilled gold over the modest backyard in Sacramento. String lights hung between tree branches, swaying gently in the breeze. A white arch draped with lavender and baby's breath stood at the center of the yard. It was the kind of small, heartfelt wedding that made people believe in second chances. 12-year-old Emily Carter stood at the edge of the lawn, her dress stiff and new, her shoes pinching. She clutched a paper cone filled with rose petals, fingers twitching nervously. All around her, people smiled and chatted, their voices blending into a soft hum. But in Emily's ears, the world felt silent, except for the thudding of her own heart. Her mother, Linda, was glowing in a cream-colored gown. She looked happier than Emily had seen her in years. Standing beside her was the man who would now be called Dad, George Turner. A tall, broad-shouldered man with gray-streaked hair and a face carved in stillness. He wasn't unkind, but he was quiet, almost too quiet. His eyes always seemed like they were calculating something serious. Emily didn't hate him, but she didn't trust him either. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," a round of claps broke out. Emily forced herself to smile, throwing the petals into the air as instructed. They floated down like whispers, settling on her mother's hair and George's suit jacket. Her mother laughed, glancing back at Emily with a loving gaze that said, "We're going to be okay." But Emily wasn't sure. The reception was simple: homemade lemonade, sandwiches, and a vanilla cake from the local bakery. George made a short toast, barely 3 sentences long. He didn't make jokes or share stories about how they fell in love. He just said, "I'm grateful for this new beginning. I promise to do my best." Everyone clapped politely. Emily's grip tightened around her cup of lemonade. When they returned home that night, their home now, Emily found her room changed. Not drastically, but just enough. Her books were moved to a higher shelf. Her posters replaced with more mature framed prints. A tidy schedule lay pinned to her bulletin board: wake at 6:30 a.m., breakfast at 7 o'clock, homework 4 to 6 p.m. George had labeled it, "Your roadmap to excellence." Emily stared at the paper. Then she turned it face down. Dinner the next evening was awkward. Linda tried to bridge the gap, asking about school, suggesting a family movie night. But George steered the conversation toward Emily's grades, asking why her math midterm was only an 85. Emily bit her tongue. "I'm proud of her," Linda said gently. "I didn't say I wasn't," George replied. "But I expect more. She's capable of more." Emily excused herself early and went to her room. Behind closed doors, she put on her headphones and drowned out the world. But the word stuck. Capable of more. Days turned to weeks. George never raised his voice, never lost his temper. But his presence was heavy. He asked about her homework. He reminded her to revise. He confiscated her phone during study hours. He praised her rarely and always with restraint. That's a good start. To Emily, it didn't feel like parenting. It felt like management. One night, she overheard her mother and George arguing in the kitchen. Linda's voice was strained. "She's just a child, George. She needs space to breathe. She'll thank us later," he said. Emily stood frozen in the hallway, her throat tightening. School became her escape. Her teachers noticed a change. Emily was focused, quieter, driven. She stopped doodling in her notebooks. Her test scores climbed. But the fire inside wasn't inspiration, it was survival. A way to stay ahead of George's disapproving silences. Then came the day of the science fair. Emily had built a model of a smart greenhouse. Her project earned 2nd place. Her teacher congratulated her in front of the class. When she got home, she placed the ribbon on the fridge with a magnet. George walked in, glanced at it, and said, "Why not first?" Emily didn't answer. That night, she cried into her pillow. The second wedding hadn't brought a fairy tale. It brought structure. Order. Rules. But not warmth. Still, in small ways, something was shifting. George started leaving her tea on her desk on rainy nights. Once, she caught him fixing the loose wheel on her bicycle before school. And another time, when she accidentally left her sketchpad on the couch, she found it later with a sticky note on top. Page 12. Good design. Keep it up. He never said those things aloud. But Emily noticed. She just didn't know what they meant yet. Not until everything changed. Not until the accident. Chapter 2. The New Discipline. It began with a calendar. One Sunday morning, George unrolled a whiteboard planner and laid it across the kitchen table. Emily stared at it from her seat, still chewing on a piece of toast. Each day was neatly marked with blocks of time: study, chores, reading, bedtime. This is your new weekly schedule, George said, matter of fact. It'll help you stay consistent. Emily glanced at her mother, who gave a hesitant smile. It's just to help you stay organized, honey. Nothing strict. But George's tone was clear. It was strict. Wake up is at 6:30. 10 minutes for hygiene. Breakfast at 7. School prep by 7:30. Evening study block from 4 to 6 p.m. No screens until weekends. Lights out by 10. Emily's heart sank. But I usually read before bed. You still can, George said. As long as it's not wasting time on the phone. She opened her mouth to protest, but stopped. What was the point? That afternoon, the structure began. George knocked on her door at exactly 4 p.m. Homework time. Emily nodded silently and opened her math book. 30 minutes in, she got up to stretch and peeked at her phone. You're off task, came his voice from behind her. She hadn't even heard him approach. He didn't shout. He didn't scold. But he took her phone and placed it in the drawer beside the hallway desk. Focus time means focus. She wanted to scream. Instead, she stared down at the textbook like it was a cage. Over the next few weeks, George's routines became the law of the house. He expected the table to be cleared after dinner. Chores were rotated and posted on the fridge. Weekends were for catching up on reading or educational videos, not cartoons, not hanging out with friends at the mall. Even the way she folded laundry was corrected. Clothes last longer if you treat them with care, he said. Sometimes Linda tried to soften things. She's still young, she'd say. But George held firm. Discipline builds character. The world won't go easy on her. Emily began to feel like she was living under surveillance. The only place she found freedom was in her sketchbook. Late at night, when everyone else slept, she'd sit under her blanket with a flashlight and draw. Blueprints of fantastical machines, robotic creatures with flower petals for wings. Futuristic homes powered by sunlight and rainwater. She'd always loved designing things, she didn't know why. Once, she left a page half-finished on her desk. The next morning, it was gone. Panicked. She checked her drawers. Nothing. She searched the trash. Empty. By evening, her sketch reappeared, carefully laminated and pinned on the fridge. No note. No comment. But she knew it was George. She didn't know how to feel about that. At school, Emily's teachers noticed the change. Her grades had improved, especially in math and science. Her essays were more thoughtful. She had become more punctual, more alert. Her homeroom teacher, Ms. Patel, praised her during parent-teacher conferences. She's clearly pushing herself. Whatever you're doing at home, it's working. George only nodded. She's got potential. We're not wasting it. Emily overheard that sentence while standing outside the classroom door. We're not wasting it. She clenched her fists. Was she someone's project now? One rainy Thursday, Emily came home to find a surprise. Her room had been rearranged. The small desk she barely used was now expanded, facing the window. A new reading lamp stood tall, its light warm and golden. Her chair was upgraded, a proper ergonomic one, the kind she'd always admired at school. On the desk lay a simple sticky note. A better space for better thinking. No signature. No fuss. Just George's way. She sat in the chair and stared out the window, unsure if she felt grateful or trapped. That night, she argued with her mom. I didn't ask for this. He just does whatever he wants. Linda tried to explain. George cares about you, Emmy. He just doesn't know how to show it like others do. By controlling every second of my day, she snapped. Linda sighed. He believes in structure because that's how he survived his own childhood. You're the most important person to him, even if he doesn't say it. Emily crossed her arms, blinking back tears. Then why doesn't it feel like love? Later that night, she peeked into the garage. George sat alone at his workbench, tinkering with a broken toaster. The radio hummed softly beside him. She stood there for a moment, watching him in silence. His hands were rough, fingers smudged with grease, but he moved with precision, with care. Suddenly, he looked up. Their eyes met. Neither said a word, but for the first time, Emily didn't look away. Chapter 3. The Silent Distance. By the time autumn settled in, Emily had mastered the art of silence. She spoke little at dinner, nodded instead of replying, and retreated to her room as soon as the plates were cleared. George didn't complain. In fact, he barely reacted at all. He treated her silence like it was part of the routine, just another checkbox to mark off in the schedule of growing up. And that made it worse. Emily didn't know what she wanted from him. Maybe a little warmth, maybe to hear him say, "You did well," after she got a 98 on her chemistry exam. Instead, he glanced at the paper and said, "Almost perfect. Keep pushing. Keep pushing. Keep climbing. Keep improving." But what if she was tired? One evening, Linda suggested a family movie night. Emily hesitated, but relented. Maybe it would be normal again. They chose a film Emily used to love, an animated adventure about a girl building flying machines. Halfway through, George's phone buzzed. He stepped out to answer it and never came back. By the time the credits rolled, Emily was gone too. Upstairs, the door closed. The silence wrapped around her like a blanket that suffocated more than comforted. At school, things looked different. Friends were drifting. While others hung out at the ice cream shop or stayed late for drama club, Emily always declined. "I have to study," she'd say. The truth was, she didn't know how to act around joy anymore. Laughter felt foreign, like a language she used to speak but had forgotten. One of her teachers, Mr. Dawson, noticed. "You okay, Carter?" he asked one day after class. She forced a smile. "Just busy." "You're doing great, but remember, you're allowed to be a kid too." She wanted to believe that. But the weight of George's expectations, silent, heavy, and constant, pressed down like invisible bricks on her back. Then came the piano incident. Linda had mentioned in passing that Emily used to play when she was younger. One Saturday, returning from grocery shopping, Emily found a second-hand upright piano in the living room. No note, no announcement. Just there. It was beautiful, old, but well-kept. The keys were slightly yellowed. When she pressed one, it let out a soft, warm tone. That night, she played a piece she half remembered from years ago. Her fingers stumbled through the chords, uncertain but persistent. From the hallway, George stood listening. He didn't step in. He didn't say a word. But the next morning, there was a new metronome on the piano bench. Something was shifting gently, like snow melting, but Emily didn't know how to trust it. Every kindness from George felt like a puzzle piece that didn't quite fit the image she had of him. She remembered how she used to flinch when he raised his voice at the news on TV. How she cried the first time he made her redo a math problem 5 times. How she once overheard him telling her mother, if she's not pushed, she'll settle. And the world doesn't reward people who settle. That version of him, the strict, cold version, was the one she had built her walls against. Now, he was confusing her. A warm lamp here. A piano there. Silent support with no explanation. She didn't know how to feel safe with someone who never used words to love. One cold December morning, Emily forgot to bring her gloves. The walk to school was brutal. Her fingers were stiff and red by the time she reached her locker. When she got home that day, there was a pair of black thermal gloves hanging on her bedroom doorknob. She stared at them for a long time. She didn't say thank you. She didn't cry. But she wore them the next day. Later that week, Linda fell ill and had to spend 2 nights at the hospital for observation. Emily expected the house to feel even more distant, more hollow. But George cooked dinner, nothing fancy, but warm. He didn't hover, but he checked on her more than once. And on the second night, he surprised her by asking, "How was your chemistry quiz?" 94, she replied quietly. "Good," he said, nodding once. "You're getting sharper." It wasn't a hug. It wasn't praise the way other parents gave it. But it was something. That night, Emily opened her sketchbook again. She drew a tall figure, broad shoulders, rough hands, standing quietly beside a child, both looking out at a rising sun. She didn't know if it was her and George. But it felt like maybe, one day, it could be. Chapter 4. The Nights of Rebellion. Emily never meant to rebel. At least, not at first. But there came a point when the silence became unbearable, like living in a house made of glass, where every sound echoed and every glance felt like surveillance. And so, one evening in late January, she broke the routine. It started with her phone. She had hidden an old second-hand phone she never turned on. But tonight, she did. She opened the group chat with her classmates, the one she hadn't touched in months. A message blinked. Movie night at Lexi's. Come if you're still alive, Carter grinning face with smiling eyes. For the first time in weeks, Emily typed back. Be there. She slipped out quietly after dinner, saying she was going to the library. George simply nodded. Don't stay out past 8. But she stayed out until nearly 10. The thrill of freedom pulsed in her veins. Popcorn, soda, giggles. A dumb romantic comedy, things normal girls her age did without feeling guilty. When she got home, the porch light was on, and George was sitting on the steps, arms folded. He didn't shout. He didn't scold. He just looked at his watch. You said library. Emily shrugged. Plans changed. You ignored my rules. I'm not a robot, she said, her voice rising. George stared at her. Unreadable. No. But you are a person with responsibilities. You mean your responsibilities, she shot back, then stormed inside. That night, for the first time in years, she slammed her bedroom door. She cried. Not because she was guilty, but because she didn't know if she was right or wrong anymore. She wanted freedom, but she also wanted his approval. And she couldn't have both. The next week became a quiet war. Emily broke curfew again. She skipped study hour. She even got a warning slip from school for turning in late homework. George didn't punish her. He didn't even raise his voice. He simply adjusted the schedule on the whiteboard, reduced her screen time, added a new block labeled Reflection. Emily erased it with a Sharpie. The final straw came on a stormy Tuesday. Emily had forgotten an umbrella. She trudged home, soaked and shivering. George saw her from the kitchen window. When she opened the door, he handed her a towel. You're going to catch a cold. I'm fine, she muttered, brushing past him. He followed her into the hallway. What's going on, Emily? She spun around, her eyes blazing. I'm tired of living like this. You treat me like a project, not a person. George didn't flinch. I treat you like someone who's capable of more. There it is again. More, she shouted. Why isn't who I am enough for you? The silence that followed was so deep, she could hear the clock ticking in the kitchen. Then, quietly, George said, Because I know what it's like to be less. Emily's anger deflated. She stood there, rain still dripping from her hair. George's voice was low. I dropped out of school at 16. Thought I was smarter than everyone. Didn't listen. By 20, I was fixing other people's broken cars and sleeping in one of my own. He looked at her, not angry, not hard. I see you. I see your mind. I just didn't want you to waste it like I did. Emily didn't know what to say, so she said nothing. The next morning, she left for school early. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't pack lunch. It was raining again. As she crossed the street near the train station, her mind foggy, her heart heavy, she didn't see the speeding car until it was too late. Screeching tires. A horn. A scream. Then darkness. Chapter 5. The Accident. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and quiet fear. Emily lay motionless on the bed in room 214, her pale skin almost blending with the white sheets. Tubes snaked from her arms, and a monitor beeped in steady rhythm, the only sound that tethered her presence to the living. The doctor's words from the night before still echoed in George's mind. Severe concussion. Fractured rib. Deep bruising on her left side. She's lucky it wasn't worse. Lucky. George sat beside her now, unmoving. His hands, normally so capable, fixing brakes, tightening bolts, lay useless in his lap. They trembled when he tried to lift a paper cup of water. He hadn't cried in over a decade. But that night, when the doctor left and Linda finally fell asleep in the visitor's chair, he cried. He was the one who had received the call. He was the one who had rushed to the scene, still in his work boots, breathless and shaking. He had seen the twisted bicycle, the backpack flung to the curb. For a moment, his world narrowed to one word. Please. Please let her be alive. Please let her not hate me. Please, please. Now, with the machines beeping and his daughter, lying broken in front of him, George felt time unravel. All his rules, all his plans, what had they meant? What had they cost? He reached forward and brushed a loose strand of hair from her forehead. His fingers hesitated. I didn't want to break you, he whispered. Emily woke up the next evening. It wasn't dramatic. No gasping. No tears. Just a slow fluttering of eyelashes and a quiet, raspy voice. Where? Linda rushed to her side, sobbing in relief. George didn't move. He stood back, letting mother and daughter reunite. But his eyes never left Emily's face. When Emily's gaze shifted to him, it lingered. Then she spoke. You came. It wasn't a question. It was disbelief. George walked forward and knelt beside her bed. I never left. The days that followed were slow and aching. Emily couldn't move much without pain. The bruises made breathing difficult. But she was alive. And healing. George was there every hour. He brought her books, refilled her water, learned how to clean her 4-line from the nurse. He sat through the quiet with her, sometimes for hours, never checking his phone, never complaining. He even read aloud one of her favorite science fiction novels, his voice deep and hesitant at first, but growing steadier with each page. Once, she caught him asleep in the corner, slumped in a chair. Jacket over his chest, hands stained with engine grease. He had come straight from the garage, and he would do it again the next day. And the next. One morning, Linda found him staring at a hospital bill. His lips were pressed into a line. That afternoon, Emily overheard a conversation she wasn't meant to hear. Sell the Impala. It'll cover most of the out-of-pocket costs, George said. But George, it's just a car, Lynn. Emily blinked. The Impala? That was his pride and joy. He'd been restoring it for years. She used to hear him talking to it in the garage like it was an old friend. He was selling it. For her. That night, when George returned from running errands, he found something new on the hospital wall, taped gently beside the window. It was a drawing. His hands, holding hers, in delicate pencil strokes, labeled in tiny handwriting. Thank you. He didn't say a word, but he stood staring at it for a long, long time. The nurses began to notice the man in the flannel jacket with tired eyes and steady hands. They asked Emily once, "Your father?" She hesitated, then smiled softly. Yes. One evening, as the sun dipped low outside the window, George sat beside her and said, "I used to think love meant preparing someone for the worst, so they'd survive it." Emily looked at him, her face calm. "And now? I think maybe love also means staying, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard." There was silence. Then Emily whispered, "You stayed." His voice broke as he answered, "Always." Chapter 6. Beside the bed. The nights in the hospital were long and quiet, broken only by the beeping of machines and the occasional shuffle of nurses' feet in the hallway. Emily couldn't sleep much. Her body ached in places she didn't even know could hurt. Every breath reminded her of the accident. But George never left. Each evening, after closing up the garage early, he arrived with something small, a crossword puzzle book, a bag of tangerines, or a strange sci-fi magazine he thought she might like. He never made a fuss, never asked if she needed him there. He just came, sat beside her, and waited for the pain to dull, for the silence to soften, for her to speak. And slowly, she did. "Did you really sell the Impala?" she asked one night, her voice still scratchy. George looked up from the Sudoku he was failing at. "Yeah, you love that car. I love you more." The words were so simple, so matter-of-fact. Emily stared at him, stunned. It was the first time he had ever said it out loud. They began talking more. She told him about the pressure of trying to be perfect, about how afraid she was of disappointing him, how she once cried in the school bathroom because he only said almost instead of "good job." George listened, really listened. Then, quietly, he said, "I'm sorry. I didn't need you to be perfect." He continued, "I just didn't know how to be a dad. So I became a drill sergeant." Emily let out a small laugh. "You were pretty convincing." "Yeah, well," he said with a smirk. "Discipline's the only tool I had. It took me a while to learn that love doesn't have to sound like orders." The days passed in this new rhythm. George arrived early in the morning, just as the sun filtered through the blinds, and left after Emily was asleep. He started bringing her sketchbooks from home. She couldn't draw much, yet her arms still felt weak, but he'd hold the pad steady while she used short, shaky strokes. One day, a nurse peeked in and smiled. "You two make a good team." George looked down at Emily, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Yeah," he said. "We're figuring it out." Linda noticed the change too. One morning, she sat beside Emily as George stepped out to get coffee. "He never showed this side of himself to anyone before," she said, brushing a lock of hair from Emily's forehead. "Not even to me." Emily looked toward the door. "Why now?" "Because sometimes it takes a crisis," her mother said gently, "to melt walls that were built from fear." One rainy afternoon, Emily asked George, "Did you ever want kids?" He hesitated. "I didn't think I'd be good at it. But you've raised me for years. I thought I was just helping out, filling a gap." Emily reached for his hand. "You were never a gap. You were the only part that held." After that, something between them clicked quietly, like a lock turning. The air felt lighter. The silence, no longer sharp, became soft. They played cards. They watched old black and white movies on George's tablet. He brought her engine schematics to look at, asking for her designer opinion. And when she smiled, he smiled back, not the reserved, half-smile of the man she once feared, but the warm, almost bashful grin of someone slowly learning how to love out loud. A week later, her physical therapist arrived with a wheelchair. "You ready to move, champ?" The therapist grinned. George stood beside the bed, his hand resting gently on Emily's shoulder. She looked at him. He nodded. "Let's take the first step." And she did, with him beside her. Chapter 7. The Price of Love. The rehab center was 30 minutes away from the hospital, tucked between golden fields and sleepy pine trees. It was quiet there, peaceful, nothing like the sterile, beeping corridors Emily had grown used to. Her doctors had recommended an intensive 3-week physical therapy program to help her regain full mobility. It wasn't covered by insurance. And it wasn't cheap. George didn't hesitate. The Impala was already gone. Sold to a collector in Reno. Next went the vintage tools passed down from his grandfather. Then the spare tire compressor, the wall-mounted speaker set. The signed poster of Dale Earnhardt Jr. Linda tried to stop him. "George, we'll find another way." He shook his head. "This is the way. I can take out a loan." "No. I got her this far. I'll get her through." He never said it to Emily. Never made her feel the weight of what he gave up. But she noticed. The garage grew emptier. The once busy shelves stood bare. She overheard whispers. She connected the dots. And it broke her heart. One morning, during her second week at the center, Emily looked up from her balance exercises and asked, "What's left in the garage?" George didn't look at her. He adjusted her walker straps and replied, "Still got my hands. Still got time." She frowned. "You sold everything." "I invested," he said simply. "In what?" He looked at her then, the corners of his mouth softening. "In you." That night, she cried. Not from pain, not from frustration, but from the quiet, overwhelming knowledge that someone had loved her this much, this silently, for so long, and she hadn't seen it. She used to think love was supposed to feel like warmth, like soft hugs and sweet words. George's love had felt like stone walls, strict rules, and impossible standards. But now she saw it differently. His love was the warmth of the blanket he tucked around her legs when he thought she was asleep. The way he memorized her medicine schedule better than the nurses. The hours he spent trying to learn her world, even if he barely understood her sketchpad blueprints. His love wasn't loud. It was solid. It stayed. One day, during a therapy session, she stumbled during a walking drill and nearly fell. George caught her before the therapist could reach her. "You all right?" he asked, breathless. She nodded. "I'm okay." He helped her stand tall again. She looked up at him. "Do you ever miss the things you sold?" He hesitated. "Sometimes." "Do you regret it?" "No. Not even the car?" He smiled. "I can build another car. I can't rebuild you." The final week at the center brought challenges. The exercises grew harder. Emily's body resisted. Her left side was still weak, the muscles trembling under pressure. She gritted her teeth through each session, sweat dripping down her back, jaw clenched tight. George never left her side. He never pushed with words. He just stood where she could see him, arms crossed, brow furrowed, silently willing her to keep going. And every time she wanted to quit, she saw his eyes, and kept going. On the last day, the therapist clapped her on the back. "She's a machine," he told George. "I haven't seen recovery this fast in months." George didn't beam. He just nodded, eyes wet. "She's tough." Emily looked at him, then said softly, "Because someone raised me that way." That night, they drove home with the windows down. The wind tangled in Emily's hair as the sunset poured gold over the horizon. George didn't say much. He never did. But when they pulled into the driveway and the porch light flicked on, Emily didn't head straight inside. Instead, she turned to him. "Dad." It was the first time she called him that. George blinked, caught off guard. "Yeah? I never said thank you." "You don't have to." "I want to." He looked at her, silent for a long moment. Then he nodded. "You're welcome, kiddo." Chapter 8. The Night He Cried. The house felt different now. It wasn't just the absence of hospital routines or the return to home-cooked meals. It was something softer, warmer. The walls no longer echoed tension. They absorbed it, transforming it into something that almost felt like peace. Emily was walking again, slowly but steadily. Her steps were measured, but her gaze was brighter. There was laughter at the dinner table, tentative at first, then real. And George, though still quiet, was present in a way she had never fully recognized before. They didn't talk about the past. Not directly. But their days together became a new language of healing. One night, Emily couldn't sleep. The pain had mostly faded, but her body still held the memory of it deep in her joints, in the ache that sometimes visited her ribs. She walked quietly to the kitchen for a glass of water, careful not to wake her mother. Then she heard it. A sound she had never heard in this house before. A low, muffled sob. She froze. It was coming from the garage. Emily stepped carefully across the living room and opened the door, expecting maybe a dropped wrench or an old engine wheezing. Instead, she found George sitting on the old wooden stool, shoulders hunched, hands covering his face. He didn't notice her at first. The lamp above his workbench was on, casting golden light across the almost empty space. Where once there were rows of tools and shelves of parts, now only shadows remained. On the bench sat a worn photo of a young Emily, grinning in overalls, grease on her cheek, taken during the one time she helped him change a tire. George was crying. Silently, brokenly. Like a man who had held it all in for far too long. Emily wanted to back away. To let him keep his privacy, his pride. But her feet didn't move. "Dad," she whispered. George stiffened. His hand moved quickly to his face, wiping the tears roughly. "I didn't hear you come down." Emily stepped closer. "Are you okay?" He gave a short, breathless laugh. "Guess I'm not as tough as I thought." She sat beside him without asking. The silence stretched between them like a thread pulled tight. "I've been strong for so long," he murmured. "For your mom. For you. But when I saw you lying in that hospital bed, tubes everywhere." He stopped. "I thought I'd lost you. And I couldn't." His voice cracked. "I couldn't forgive myself." Emily reached out and took his hand. "You didn't lose me," she said gently. "You saved me." George looked at her then, truly looked. His eyes were red, but clear. "I kept thinking, what if I pushed too hard? What if all those years of pressure, what if they broke something in you I can't fix?" Emily shook her head. "You didn't break me. You made me strong. I made you afraid." "Yes," she said honestly. "For a while. But now I understand." She took a deep breath. "You didn't know how to say, 'I love you,' so you said it through structure. Through expectations. Through being there when no one else would." He looked away, ashamed. "And now?" she asked. He glanced back at her. "Now I'm learning to say it better." The garage was still. But the air was lighter now. Emily rested her head against his shoulder. "I used to wonder if you were proud of me," she said. George blinked. "What?" "I never heard it. Not in words. I thought maybe you didn't really see me." He turned to her, voice trembling. "Emily, I've always seen you. Every late night studying. Every time you chose courage over comfort. I didn't know how to say it then. But I'm proud of you every single day." Her throat tightened. "Then say it again," she whispered. "I'm proud of you," he said, firmer now. "So damn proud." They sat there a long time, side by side, in the quiet glow of a space that had once belonged only to tools and machines, but now, finally, belonged to them both. When they stood to leave, George paused at the light switch. "You know," he said softly, "I never wanted to be a father because I didn't think I'd be good at it." Emily smiled. "You're not perfect. But you're mine." He chuckled. "I'll take it." And together. They turned out the light. Chapter 9. The Quiet Comeback. The first day back at school wasn't loud. There was no welcome banner. No confetti. No dramatic hallway applause. Just the soft sound of sneakers squeaking against tile and the occasional, "Hey, Emily," as students passed by, unsure of how to talk to the girl who had vanished and returned with a limp. Emily Carter didn't mind the quiet. She wasn't looking for attention. She just wanted normalcy, her desk in the back corner, her notebook filled with half doodles, half notes, and the comfort of numbers that didn't judge her like people sometimes did. But walking through the doors again after the accident was like stepping into a new world with old walls. Everything was the same, except her. Her teachers smiled gently, asked if she needed extra time, made soft space for her to breathe. Her classmates, unsure of how much was too much, kept their distance. A few tried to make conversation. Most didn't know where to begin. She didn't blame them. It wasn't their job to understand everything she had survived. What surprised her most was how strong she felt. Not in her legs, those still ached if she stood too long. Not in her arms, she still carried her bag on one shoulder. But inside, where it mattered, there was a stillness she had never known before. At lunch, she sat by the window, sketchbook in hand. She wasn't hiding. She was watching and healing. One afternoon, after chemistry class, her teacher pulled her aside. Still aiming for the regional science fair? He asked, his tone casual but hopeful. Emily hesitated. She had forgotten about it during the months of painkillers and rehab sessions. I don't know, she admitted. I don't feel caught up. He smiled. From what I hear, you're already ahead. She thought of George, sitting up late, flipping through her blueprints, asking clumsy questions about design. Of the way he learned her world, not to control it, but to understand it. Maybe she was ahead. That night at dinner, she asked, "Do you still have the toolbox?" George looked up from his plate. Which one? The one with the loose latch. The one with the blue grip screwdriver. His eyebrows lifted. Yeah, in the closet. Can I borrow it? George leaned back in his chair. What are you building? Emily smiled. A second chance. They cleared space in the garage together. Not much, just enough for a workbench, a lamp, a shelf of her tools. It smelled like old oil and pinewood. She brought out her sketch pad, her laptop, and the prototype she had started months ago before everything fell apart. A smart greenhouse pod. Small, portable, solar-powered, and designed for apartment dwellers. It was an idea born from science class and refined during long hospital nights when the world felt too fragile. George watched her work, sometimes offering suggestions, sometimes just holding the flashlight. He didn't ask about awards. He just asked, "What do you need?" A few nights later, she caught him sanding down an old plaque he had made years ago, something he had once called the rules wall. She peeked over his shoulder. "You're getting rid of it?" He nodded. "Thought we could build something new." She handed him a marker. "Start with this," she said, and wrote on the wood. "This house is built with second chances." George stared at it, then nodded. "That's the best blueprint I've ever seen." As the weeks passed, Emily moved through school with quiet confidence. She didn't rush. She didn't compete. She created. Her prototype took shape. Her voice returned, firmer, clearer. Her teachers took notice. Her classmates, curious now, began to ask questions. And Emily answered them, not with superiority, but with warmth. She no longer needed to prove herself. She had already done that to the only person who mattered. And to herself. On a rainy Friday afternoon, she submitted her greenhouse project to the Regional Science Fair Committee. George drove her to the post office. On the way back, he asked, "So, think you'll win?" Emily looked out at the gray clouds, the way the rain hit the windshield like soft fingertips. "I think I already did," she said. And she meant it. Chapter 10. The fair. The Regional Science Fair was held in a glass-domed convention center downtown. From the outside, it looked like something out of a futuristic film: steel curves, shimmering windows, banners of bright green and blue that read, "Shaping Tomorrow, the Young Inventors Expo." Emily clutched her presentation board, fingers slightly trembling. Her greenhouse prototype was packed in a foam-lined case beside her. George walked beside her in silence, carrying the laptop and cables like sacred equipment. He didn't ask if she was nervous. He didn't tell her to do her best. He just said, "Let's set it up." And she did. Inside, rows of booths stretched across the center like a sea of young minds at work. LED displays blinked. 3D printers hummed. Students in matching shirts rehearsed their speeches in quiet corners while parents hovered with coffee cups and folded pamphlets. Emily's booth was near the back, nothing flashy. Just a white table, a laptop, and her solar-powered greenhouse, now softly glowing with internal light. When she plugged it in, it came alive, humidity sensors pulsing, miniature fans spinning gently. Artificial sunlight filtering through the tinted dome. A small crowd gathered. Not for long. Just long enough. Just enough to notice. The judging panel arrived after lunch. There were 3 of them, 2 scientists from UC Berkeley and 1 retired engineer who introduced himself simply as Jim. They asked questions. Good ones. Deep ones. About her use of renewable materials, the sustainability model, the software interface. Emily answered everyone not like someone who had memorized a script, but like someone who believed in her idea. George stood just beyond the booth, arms crossed, watching. He didn't move, didn't interrupt, but every time she glanced at him, he gave a slight nod. She had never realized how much courage lived in that one small gesture. After the judges left, the crowd thinned. Emily let out a long breath. George handed her a bottle of water. "Well? I think I did okay," she said, taking a sip. "You looked like you belonged up there." She smiled. For the first time. "I think I felt like I did." The award ceremony was held on the main stage, bright lights, applause, nervous laughter echoing off the ceiling. Students filled the rows, some bouncing knees, some clasping hands, some pretending they didn't care. Emily sat still, heart pounding. She wasn't expecting to win. Not really. But hope, that stubborn little flame, still flickered. 3rd place was announced. Not her. 2nd place. Still not her. Then. And 1st place in the 2025 Regional Young Inventors Expo goes to Emily Carter for her project, the Adaptive Solar Greenhouse. Her breath caught. The world froze. Then George was beside her, whispering, "Go. That's yours." She walked onto the stage, feet shaky, but her shoulders steady. The applause blurred into a distant hum as a medal was placed around her neck and a plaque handed to her. She looked into the crowd and found him, standing tall in the very back, clapping once, slowly. He didn't cheer. He didn't cry. But in his eyes, she saw everything. Pride, joy, and something more. Relief. After the ceremony, students took photos, friends hugged, and reporters hovered. Emily walked straight past them all. She went to George. "I wish Mom was here," she said. She wanted to be. Night shift. He looked at the medal. "You did it." She handed it to him. His eyebrows lifted. "This is yours." "No," she said softly. "This is ours." On the way home, the medal dangled from the rearview mirror. The plaque sat between them on the dashboard. George didn't say much, but when they pulled into the driveway, he turned off the engine and looked at her. "You know, you don't have to prove anything anymore." "I wasn't trying to," she said. "Then why did you push so hard?" Emily thought for a moment. "Because I wanted to be proud of myself," she said. "And because I wanted you to see that your belief in me wasn't wasted." George reached over and gently squeezed her shoulder. It never was. That night, back home, Emily placed the plaque on her bedroom shelf, not beside her trophies, but beside her sketchbooks. Because this wasn't just about winning. It was about becoming. And she was still becoming. But now she was no longer afraid of the road ahead. Because she knew. She wouldn't walk it alone. Chapter 11. The Letter Never Sent. The rain came softly that evening like a lullaby whispered across rooftops. Emily sat on her bedroom floor, a steaming cup of chamomile tea beside her and a cardboard box of old notebooks open in front. The room was quiet except for the patter of raindrops on the window and the occasional rustle of paper as she flipped through sketches, essays, and faded science fair ribbons from years ago. She wasn't sure what she was looking for. Maybe closure. Maybe memory. Maybe a piece of her old self that she had left behind during those long months in the hospital. Then she found it. A folded sheet of lined paper, yellowed slightly at the edges. Her 12-year-old handwriting sprawled across the front. To Mr. Turner, but I'll never give this to you. Emily froze. She had forgotten this. Written the week after her mother's wedding, after the first time George had taken her phone away and rewritten her study schedule. She remembered crying that night. Angry and confused, feeling like a stranger in her own home. She opened the letter. Her voice, young, scared, and trembling, rose off the page. Dear Mr. Turner, I don't know why you have to be so strict. I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for a new dad. I didn't ask for rules and charts and your serious face every morning. Sometimes I think you don't even like me. You act like a coach, not a parent. Like I'm a player in your game, and if I mess up, I'm benched. But I also see the way you check my homework. The way you clean the dishes before mom gets home. The way you fix things without saying anything. Maybe you care. But you don't say it. And I need to hear it. I need to know that I'm more than just a project to manage. Anyway, I'm writing this, but I won't give it to you. Because if I do, maybe everything will get worse. But I hope, one day, you'll say you're proud of me, even if I'm not perfect. Emily. Emily sat still for a long time. The letter in her lap felt heavier than it looked. She hadn't remembered every word, but reading it now, as the girl who had grown through pain, love, and rebuilding, made her heart ache in a strange, quiet way. She stood. She didn't fold the letter back up. She didn't put it away. She walked down the hall, her bare feet silent against the wooden floor. The garage door was slightly ajar, the yellow glow of the old desk lamp spilling through. George was there, tinkering with a rusty old radio he'd found at a thrift store. He looked up. Couldn't sleep? No, she said. Found something. She held out the letter. He hesitated. What's that? A letter I wrote years ago. Never meant to give it to you. George looked at her, then took the paper with both hands. Slowly, he sat down and began to read. The garage was silent. The rain outside turned into a soft rhythm, steady, gentle, like the beating of a calm heart. When he reached the end, George didn't look up right away. His fingers held the edges of the paper, his eyes lingering on her childhood handwriting. Then, he set the letter down carefully on the workbench. I wish I'd read this a long time ago, he said, his voice hoarse. Emily sat beside him. I wasn't brave enough to give it to you. I wasn't ready to read it. He turned to her. You were right. I treated you like a system to fix, not a heart to understand. She didn't respond. She didn't need to, because he wasn't finished. I didn't know how to be a dad, George continued. I thought if I gave you structure, you'd grow up safe. Prepared. Strong. But I forgot something. What? That a child isn't just something you raise. She's someone you love. Emily's throat tightened. I did love you, he said quietly. I just didn't know how to say it without sounding like I was giving instructions. She blinked fast, tears pooling. I know now, he added. I see the difference. I feel it every day. They sat there, the letter between them like a bridge over a canyon that once seemed uncrossable. Then Emily reached over and gently picked up the paper. She folded it once, then again, and handed it back. This time, she whispered, you can keep it. George looked down at the folded letter in his palm like it was something sacred. I will, he said. They didn't hug. They didn't cry. They simply sat together in the old garage, listening to the rain, hearts open, walls down, No more unsent words between them. For the first time in years, everything that needed to be said had been heard. And that was enough. Chapter 12. The first Father's Day. It had been a quiet month since the science fair. Emily's days filled up again: school, sketches, slow walks in the park. Her body had healed more than she thought possible. But her heart, that had healed in ways she never expected. The word dad had taken root in her mind now, not as something forced, but something earned. So when June rolled around and Father's Day appeared on the calendar, Emily didn't hesitate. She circled the date in red. She planned it quietly. Linda helped. She reserved a spot at their favorite local diner, the one with the checkered floors and bacon that always came out too crispy. Emily made a reservation for 3 and asked them to keep it low-key but special. On the morning of Father's Day, she got up early. She laid out a small box beside George's morning coffee, wrapped in newspaper, the funny pages, and tied with a red string. George walked into the kitchen, still in his flannel pajama pants, rubbing his eyes. He looked at the box, then at her. "What's this?" "Open it," Emily said, trying to sound casual but failing to hide the grin tugging at her lips. He sat down, tugged at the string, and unwrapped the paper. Inside was a keychain. A small gear salvaged from the radio they'd repaired together, polished and engraved. It read, "To the man who rebuilt me, Emily." George held it for a long time. He didn't speak. Then, slowly, he stood up, walked over, and wrapped his arms around her in the first full embrace they had ever shared. Not a side hug, not a brief pat, a real one. A father's hug. "Thank you," he whispered into her hair. "This means more than I can say." "I know," she said. "That's why I said it for you." At brunch, the waitress greeted them with a cheerful smile. "Happy Father's Day," she said, pouring coffee. George smiled politely. Linda leaned back in the booth, watching with eyes that shimmered. And then Emily did it. She looked up at the waitress and said, clear as sunlight, "This is my dad." George blinked. He didn't look at her right away. But when he did, his eyes were glassy. "Yeah," he said. "I guess I finally made the title." "No," Emily replied, smiling. "You earned it." After the meal, they took a walk down the old railroad trail near their home. The breeze was soft, the wildflowers in bloom. George walked beside Emily, not ahead of her like before, not behind her like he once had in the hospital, but with her. Side by side. They passed a little boy riding his bike, wobbling as he turned the corner. His dad jogged after him, yelling, "You're doing it, buddy. Keep going." Emily watched. She remembered her own milestones, so many done alone. Or at least, that's how they felt back then. But not anymore. That evening, as the sun dipped low and cast golden light through the living room windows, George handed Emily a small envelope. "No occasion," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "You sure? Because it feels like one." "Just open it." Inside was a folded sheet of sketch paper. But it wasn't hers. It was his. A pencil drawing of a car. Not any car, the Impala. But beside it stood a girl in overalls. One hand on the hood, the other holding a wrench. At the bottom, he had written, in blocky handwriting, "Next project, our rebuild." Emily laughed through the tears. "You're serious?" George nodded. "Thought we could find a junkyard shell. Start fresh. Piece it together. You design it. I build it. We do it together." Her heart swelled. "I'd like that," she said. And as the stars came out that night and the last light faded from the sky, Emily sat in the garage, her sketchpad in hand, the old toolbox beside her, and her dad humming to himself as he organized bolts by size. There were no medals here, no judges, no stages. But this was the real prize. Love, built one quiet act at a time. And this time, no one had to say it. They just lived it. Together. Chapter 13. Departure. The house was quieter than usual that morning. Emily's suitcase sat by the door, zipped shut, a Stanford sticker peeling slightly at the corner. Her backpack was already slung over the chair. A thermos of tea made by George rested beside it, still steaming. The scent of cinnamon and apple clung to the kitchen air. She stood at the threshold, taking it all in one last time. The faded wallpaper, the wonky ceiling fan that always made a soft ticking sound, the creak in the hallway floorboard, and the smell, engine oil mixed with something warm, something like home. George walked in from the garage, wiping his hands on an old rag. He was wearing his usual flannel, the sleeves rolled up, grease on his knuckles. "All set?" he asked, nodding toward the suitcase. Emily nodded. "I think so." He didn't ask again. He never did. Linda hugged her first, long and tight. "Call every Sunday," she whispered, "and eat something that isn't from a vending machine." "I promise," Emily said, laughing through the tears. Then it was George's turn. He didn't step forward. He didn't raise his arms. He simply held out a set of keys. Emily blinked. "Is that?" "Your old car," he said. "She's been tuned up. New tires. Batteries fresh. Might not look like much, but she'll get you there." Emily took the keys slowly, feeling the cold metal in her palm. "You fixed her up?" He shrugged. Figured she'd want to say goodbye too. Outside, the morning sun lit the driveway in gold. The car was waiting, engine humming softly. George had even wiped down the dashboard. On the passenger seat sat a folded map, a paper map, with a red circle around Palo Alto and a small arrow pointing to it. Next to it, a bag of sunflower seeds and 2 granola bars. He knew. He always knew what she'd need, even before she asked. Emily turned back one last time. George stood in the doorway, arms crossed, squinting into the sun. She walked up to him, slowly. And this time, she hugged him. Not a quick, polite hug, but a deep one, a real one. The kind that made your chest press into someone's heartbeat and told them without words, "Thank you for everything. Thank you for staying. Thank you for loving me in silence and action." He stood still at first. Then his arms came up and wrapped around her shoulders with a kind of quiet strength. "You'll be all right," he said. She looked up at him. "What if I'm not? Then call me." She got into the car, rolled down the window. George leaned on the frame, looking at her one last time. "If something breaks," he said, "don't panic. I know. There's always a way to fix it." She smiled. "Yeah?" He nodded. "Might not look like new after, but sometimes better." As she pulled out of the driveway, she glanced in the rearview mirror. George didn't wave. But he didn't go back inside either. He stood there, watching, until she turned the corner and disappeared. 3 hours into the drive, Emily stopped at a rest area. She reached for the glove compartment, searching for napkins, and instead found a sealed envelope. On it, in George's crooked handwriting, "Don't open unless you're scared." She stared at it for a moment, heart swelling. She didn't open it. Not yet. But she placed it gently in her backpack, right next to her laptop and a screwdriver George had once given her, engraved with the words, "Figure it out." She reached campus just before sunset. Stanford looked like a dream, red-roofed buildings, soft lawns, students on skateboards and bikes. Everything smelled new. Everything sounded like potential. She parked the car, got out, and just before she stepped into her dorm building, she looked up at the sky, took a deep breath, and whispered, "Thanks, Dad." Chapter 14. First Fall. The first week at Stanford passed in a blur of shiny newness. Orientation tours, roommate introductions, syllabus handouts. Everyone seemed to know exactly who they were, or at least, they played the part flawlessly. Emily tried to keep up, but something inside her felt unsettled, like she was walking on a moving walkway that never stopped. She smiled when expected. nodded politely, said cool a lot even when she didn't mean it. But at night, she lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, wondering if she had overestimated herself. By the second week, the first cracks began to show. Group project and intro to environmental design. For students, one shared vision. Or at least, that was the idea. Emily had always been the one with plans, blueprints, precision. But here, her suggestions were dismissed. Too structured, one teammate said. Too rigid, another added. Let's just freestyle it. She tried to adapt. But the final result, a half-baked model built with popsicle sticks and string lights, was a disaster. They presented it anyway. Afterward, the professor said, "A fun concept, but not very feasible." He looked at Emily. "You're used to working alone, aren't you?" She nodded. Then came midterm season. Papers, lab reports, late nights. Her laptop crashed 2 days before a major submission. The screen froze mid-sentence, then went black. She rebooted. Nothing. She sat at her desk, breathing shallowly. Tried again. Still nothing. Her backup drive? Fried. The library computer lab? Full. She had 10 hours left until the deadline and 0 working tools. She stared at the wall, her chest tightening. Her first real breakdown didn't come with noise. It came with stillness. At 11:47 p.m., Emily pulled out her phone. Her finger hovered over the contact for a long time. Then she pressed call dad. The line rang once. Twice. Then His voice was groggy but steady. Her own voice broke. "My computer's dead." A pause. "Are you hurt?" "No, just overwhelmed." Another pause. "Want me to come up?" She hesitated. It was a 5-hour drive. Middle of the night. The problem was a machine, not a wound. But still, yes, she whispered. George arrived just before sunrise. He didn't knock on her dorm room door. He texted, "I'm outside." She slipped out quietly. Found him leaning against the car, holding a familiar old laptop under one arm and a bag from her hometown cafe in the other. "Breakfast," he said, handing it over. Still warm. She stared at him. Eyes glassy. "You didn't have to come." "Sure I did." They sat on a bench near the engineering building as the sky turned pale orange. George opened the laptop and booted it up. "This one's old, but it'll run your design software. Save some drivers on a flash drive too, just in case." Emily blinked. "You really drove all night to fix my computer?" "No," he said. "I came to remind you that just because you're somewhere new doesn't mean you're alone." He handed her the flash drive. "I can't make school easier, but I can hold the light while you crawl through the mess." She laughed softly. "You always say things like that." Garage wisdom. Garage wisdoms kept a lot of things running, he said with a grin. Before he left, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small cloth pouch. Inside, a tiny multi-tool. Screwdriver. USB. Flashlight. Wire cutter. "Don't ask me why," he said. "Just carry it." She smiled. Emergency repairs? For tech or soul? Either way. When he drove off, she stood on the curb longer than necessary, watching the taillights disappear into the brightening horizon. She didn't feel fixed. But she didn't feel broken either. She felt supported. And sometimes that was enough. Later that day, she opened her new old laptop. Inside the documents folder was a file titled, "When You Forget Who You Are.txt." She clicked it. One sentence. "You're the girl who rebuilt herself, and I watched in awe." She cried again. This time, not from failure, but from love. Chapter 15, His Way of Showing Up. The multi-tool stayed in her backpack. Emily carried it to every class, every group meeting, every coffee shop cramming session. She never used it, didn't need to, but knowing it was there, tucked in a zippered pocket, made her feel like she had a small piece of home walking with her. George had only visited campus once since that late-night rescue. He didn't text much. His responses were often one word. Got it. You good. Proud. But he never missed anything. He showed up in the way he always had. Not loud, not decorated, not obvious. When Emily mentioned she needed to buy a new adapter for her tablet, a package arrived 2 days later, no note. No return label, just the exact model she needed. When her presentation required a physical prototype and her soldering iron stopped working, George sent one of his own, wrapped in an old rag. Still faintly smelling of engine oil and home. And when midterms ended and she texted, "I survived," he replied, "Of course you did." One evening, drained from back-to-back lectures and group tension, Emily returned to her dorm and found something strange. Her desk drawer wouldn't close properly. Inside was a bag. She opened it carefully. There was no note, but the contents were unmistakable. A pack of her favorite trail mix. A single Polaroid of her and George, side by side, both wearing safety goggles in the garage. A post-it stuck on the photo with 5 words. You build. I believe. Always. She clutched it to her chest. How had he even gotten it into her dorm? She texted. Did you break into my building? He replied. I know a guy. She laughed out loud, alone in her tiny room. And didn't feel alone at all. Emily began to notice something else. Her friends, new ones, admired her calm under pressure, the way she fixed things others would panic over. They called it her garage brain. But she knew better. It wasn't just logic. It was legacy. A quiet, steady love she'd inherited, one that fixed instead of fled. One that taught her, without fanfare, how to hold her ground and care with her hands. She once told a classmate, half-jokingly, I was raised by a man who believes every problem has a wrench somewhere that fits. He replied, sounds like a good guy. And she nodded. He's the best. That weekend, she video called home. Linda appeared first, grinning into the screen. Still eating actual food, she teased. Still trying. George appeared in the background, wiping his hands on a shop towel. Hey, college girl. Emily beamed. Hey, garage dad. He waved, then turned to leave the frame. Wait, she called out. Stay. I want to show you something. She turned the camera and held up her latest prototype, an early-stage water purifier for arid regions, powered by solar energy and low-tech components. George leaned closer, eyes narrowed. Looks sharp. Still needs refining. You'll get there. They didn't talk long. They never did. But when the call ended, Emily sat back and stared at the paused image of her father's quiet, proud face. It hit her then, not as a dramatic moment, but as a slow, warm knowing. George had never tried to be everything. He had simply made sure she never had to carry everything alone. That was his way. That was love, in his language. She took the Polaroid from her desk and taped it above her bed. Next to it, she wrote in pen. He doesn't say much, but he shows up, and that's more than enough. Chapter 16. Letters from a Distance. It started in October. A plain envelope slipped into Emily's campus mailbox. No stamp, no return address, just her name written in bold, blocky letters. Emily Carter. Inside was a folded sheet of yellow-lined paper. The kind you'd find in a garage drawer under receipts and spare bolts. The handwriting was unmistakable, heavy pressure, slanted slightly to the right. Hey kid. Your mom says you're still drinking too much coffee. You didn't get that from me. I take my caffeine like I take my carbs. Optional. The heaters busted again. I almost called a plumber. But where's the fun in that? Your cat misses you. Or at least she misses yelling at me for being slow with her dinner. P.S. Don't forget to torque your ideas tight before presenting them. Loose bolts ruin good engines. Dad. Emily sat on her dorm bed, the letter pressed to her chest. She didn't cry, but her heart ached in the softest way. From that month on, the letters kept coming. Like clockwork, one envelope, once a month, always handwritten, always signed the same way. Dad. No email. No texting emojis. Just ink and paper and tiny pieces of his world. He wrote about the garage. About Linda's new obsession with baking bread. About the neighbor's grandson learning to ride a bike. Once, he wrote a full page about a squirrel that had somehow gotten into the attic. Sometimes he included extras. A small leaf from their backyard tree, laminated in tape. A doodle of her as a robot, labeled, Prototype 1, all brain, no quit. A folded-up joke from a newspaper clipping circled in red. Sound familiar? He never said, I miss you. But every letter screamed it. Emily began to keep them in a wooden box on her bookshelf. She called it the tool chest, because that's what they were, tools for lonely days, for self-doubt, for moments when the world felt too loud and too much. She never asked him to send them. And he never told her he would. But he did, without fail, because that was George Turner's way. One day, after receiving her 5th letter, this one containing a pressed bolt she had once lost under the garage stairs, Emily walked into her design studio and stared at her latest project. It wasn't working. The circuit board kept shorting out. Her code kept glitching. She wanted to quit. Instead, she opened the latest letter and reread one line. Every broken thing has a logic to it. You just have to listen long enough. She stared at her prototype, then smiled, and listened. Later that semester, she had to present a personal reflection for a communications class. The prompt: who taught you how to hold yourself together? Her classmates talked about mothers, coaches, teachers. Emily walked to the front of the class holding a small envelope. She didn't read a speech. She read one of George's letters aloud, word for word, complete with squirrel story and all. When she finished, the room was silent. Then someone whispered, "That's beautiful." Emily nodded. He doesn't say things like, "I love you," but he writes them every month. At Christmas break, when she finally came home, George met her at the door. No hug, just a gruff, "You grew." Emily laughed. Barely. He opened the door wider. "Garage is warm. Got something to show you." Inside, there was a wall once covered in rusted tools that now displayed something new. A corkboard, filled with photocopies of every letter he had sent her. Next to each, a sticky note, in Emily's handwriting. Responses she had never mailed, but written anyway. She turned to him. "You kept them?" He scratched his neck. "Yeah, had to make sure they weren't total garbage." They weren't. She stepped forward and touched the center of the board, where he'd pinned the first letter with a washer. George cleared his throat. "I figured, you don't need me there all the time, but maybe this way, part of me gets to sit beside you." Emily looked at him. "No," she said quietly. "You were never beside me." His face stiffened, but she smiled. "You were under me, like foundation, like steel." His lips twitched. Steel's not soft, but it's what keeps things standing. That night, Emily added one more sticky note to the board. Her handwriting, small but firm. "Every letter is a tool, but you are the blueprint." Chapter 17. The Stage. The auditorium was vast. Rows of velvet-lined chairs stretched back endlessly. Spotlights hung like stars from the rafters. In the center, a lone wooden podium, polished smooth, standing before a screen that read, "Future Front, Innovators Shaping Tomorrow." Emily stood backstage, palms sweating, heart knocking against her ribs like a fist on a locked door. It had taken years to get here. Her name was printed in the glossy program under a bold heading. Top 5 young designers in sustainable technology under 25. She was the only woman. The only one from a small town. The only one whose prototypes were built in a garage, next to a box of wrenches and a cat who hated being petted. She breathed in, then out. Next up, The host's voice echoed through the speakers. We welcome Emily Carter, founder of EcoFrame Labs and developer of the adaptive solar pod, currently being piloted in 6 countries for rural farming efficiency. Applause rose like a wave. The spotlight shifted, and Emily stepped out. The moment her foot touched the stage, her mind went quiet. Not empty, focused. She thought of every late night, every rejected grant, every soldered wire and failed code loop, every time she wanted to quit and didn't. And, of course, every time George had shown up without needing to be asked. She began her speech. No notes. No script. Just story. She told them about the greenhouse design she'd built at 16. About how it wasn't born in a fancy lab, but in a garage that smelled like coffee and motor oil. About how the man who taught her to turn screws straight also taught her how to stand steady in a world that liked to tilt. She ended with a slide showing the greenhouse in use, one in Kenya, one in Arizona, one on a rooftop in Vietnam. People tending plants, feeding families. When we design things, she said, we're not just solving problems. We're building hope. The room was silent for half a second. Then came the applause, real applause. Long, rising. Loud. Emily blinked against the lights, smiling, a little dazed. And then, through the brightness, she looked out, scanning rows and rows of faces. Suits. Cameras. Strangers. Until she saw him. Back row. Standing. Wearing a plain button-down. Holding a soft cap in his hands. Grease still under his fingernails. Eyes rimmed with red. George. He didn't wave. Didn't call out. He just stood and clapped. Slowly, with the smallest nod. And that was enough. Because Emily knew exactly what it meant. I saw you. I always saw you. And now the world does too. Afterward, people wanted interviews, photos, LinkedIn connections. She smiled, nodded, answered questions. But her eyes kept drifting toward the back. Toward the man who didn't belong here, and yet belonged more than anyone else in the room. By the time she pushed through the crowd and reached the hallway, he was leaning against the wall near the exit. She walked up. Neither said anything at first. Then George cleared his throat. That was something. Emily grinned. You didn't fall asleep? Not once. They stood there, silence wrapping around them like an old blanket. Then he added, quieter, I couldn't miss it. You didn't tell me you were coming. Didn't want to make it about me. She smiled. Too late. She reached into her bag and pulled out the program. Page 5, she said. My bio. Want to see what I wrote? He took the paper. Read slowly. His lips moved as he read. Raised by a mechanic who taught me that there's nothing in life that can't be rebuilt if you've got the patience, the right tools, and someone who believes you're worth the time. George looked up. His voice cracked slightly. You wrote that. I lived that, she said. Chapter 18. The man in the back row. After the applause faded, the lights dimmed, and the next speaker took the stage, Emily found herself unable to look away. There, in the very back row, sat George. Not in a fancy suit or a corporate badge. Not with a polite smile or practice pose. Just a man in a worn shirt with sleeves rolled up, hands resting lightly on his knees. He clapped slowly, deliberately, eyes fixed on her with an intensity that pierced through the crowd. Emily felt her breath catch. For years, she'd imagined this moment differently. She thought he would be proud in private, silent in the shadows, maybe even absent altogether. But here he was, visible, present. During the reception, photographers and reporters circled the stage. Fans approached her with congratulations. But Emily's eyes kept searching for him. He slipped through the crowd like a ghost, hesitant but determined. Finally, he found her near the exit. Hey, he said, voice soft. She smiled, her heart swelling with a strange joy. You came. I promised I would. They walked outside into the cool evening air. The city lights glittered around them, a world of endless possibility. George looked up at the sky. I never imagined you'd get this far. Emily looked at him. Neither did I. He chuckled, a little breathless. You were always stronger than me. She shook her head. You made me strong. He squeezed her hand. We made each other. As they stood there, the noise of the city faded. And in that moment, Emily knew something deeper had changed. The man who once seemed so distant was now her anchor. Her father. Her friend. Her greatest supporter. Back inside, a group of students gathered, whispering about the man in the back row. Who's that? Somebody important, obviously. He's not a CEO, not an investor, but look at the way he watches her. A young woman smiled. That's love. Later, Emily received a message from a fellow speaker. Your dad was amazing tonight. Quiet strength. I hope I have someone like him someday. She smiled, thinking of the garage, the late nights, the letters, the wrenches, and the unwavering presence. Chapter 19. What I Never Said. The cafe was quiet, a soft hum of conversation and the clinking of cups filling the air. Emily and George sat in a corner booth, the only light coming from a small lamp above their table. Between them lay a small wooden box, the same one Emily kept her letters in. George stirred his coffee slowly, eyes fixed on the cup. I've never been good with words, he began, voice low. Emily nodded, waiting. There were things I never said to you, he continued. Things I wanted to say, but didn't know how. She leaned in. He cleared his throat. I was scared. Scared, she asked softly. Scared that if I said the wrong thing, I'd lose you. That my love wouldn't be enough. Emily's eyes glistened. I never doubted that. He shook his head. You did. I could see it, in your silence, your distance. She looked down. Because I didn't hear it. I know. He reached across the table, took her hand. But I hope now you feel it, in every letter, every wrench fixed, every night I stayed. She squeezed his hand. I do. He smiled, a little shy. Good. Because I'm proud. Not just of what you do, but of who you are. Emily smiled back. That's the first time I've heard that. He shrugged. Better late than never. They sat there, hand in hand, in the quiet glow of the cafe. No more walls. No more silence. Just love. Chapter 20. A letter for him. The garage smelled of oil and memories. It was late evening. The sun dipped low behind the trees, casting long shadows that danced along the walls lined with tools and old photographs. Emily stood quietly in the center, a single envelope in her hand. She had written this letter many times in her mind. Tonight, she finally put pen to paper. Dear Dad, I don't know if you'll read this right away, or keep it for later, or maybe even never open it. But I wanted to write it anyway. You never asked for recognition. You never needed applause. Your love was quiet, built in actions, not words. You sold the things you loved to give me a chance. You fixed what was broken, even when it wasn't your job. You believed in me, often more than I believed in myself. I am who I am because of you. Not because of what you said, but because of what you did. And I am proud, more than words can say, to be your daughter. Thank you for never giving up on me. With all my love, Emily. She folded the letter carefully, sealed it, and pinned it to the garage wall among the old letters George had written to her. She stepped back, eyes lingering on the collection, each envelope a chapter of their shared story. The weight of years lifted, replaced by a gentle peace. From behind her, a familiar voice spoke softly. Did you mean all that? Emily turned to see George standing in the doorway, his eyes glistening. She smiled. Every word. He walked over and gently took her hand. Then I'll keep it here, he said, pointing to the wall. With all the others. Together. They stood in the quiet garage, the heart of their home. No words were needed. Their story was written in letters, in love, and in every repaired piece of life.